Okay, welcome everybody to this Get in Shape webinar, the first one we've had for 2021, and it's already the 1st of April. We are now 2 weeks into the Financial Markets Conduct Act regime for financial advice, and it was a really good time for us to take stock of where we're at and plan kind of the way forward. So thank you very much for joining us this day before Easter. It's scared a lot of people off having Easter starting tomorrow, people going off for an early holiday. So thank you very much again for joining us. It is my pleasure once again to welcome our compliance experts, our well-known panel to this webinar. We have Karty Mayne, of course, from Rosewill Consulting, Steve Burgess from Compliance Refinery, and David Greensade from Strategi. So very privileged to have these legends join us again for this webinar. And I'm Mark Banicevich from Partners Life. Just here to hold things together and ask the questions today, really. What we're planning to do over the next 12 months, as you know, the regime is now in place. The law is already now applying in almost all parts. Existing financial advisors have another couple of years to meet the code of conduct requirements in many cases, but not exclusively. And we have the full licensing to go. So this is really the start of the journey for most financial advice businesses. And what we want to do with this series of webinars over the next 12 months or so is dig a little bit deeper into some of the challenges that will arise to help you prepare for the regime as it's going forward. But as I said, what we want to do today is just kind of take stock on where we are. So the four of us got together and had a little chat and discuss the sorts of things that we were seeing in the market, the challenges that we're finding financial advisors and financial advice providers are facing. And those topics came out, the subjects that we brought up came out into four broad topics. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So you'll see the four topics on the screen there. The areas around disclosure. There are a number of financial advisors, despite having this fantastic FSC disclosure guide, that are having some challenges putting their disclosure together and understanding how that works. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the advice process and how this regime expects you to raise the bar on where you were a couple of weeks ago. So the changes that need to be made in your business as a result of that change. We're going to talk a little bit about preparing your business for full licensing. And that's really going to be, to a large extent, the focus of the webinars going forward, which will hold monthly this year. And then there is an area around clarity around the industry and the law. So what's going on more broadly in the industry. And the broader understanding of the changes in law. Because, of course, we, in our day jobs, don't read legislation. We don't read regulations. We rely on others to bring that down into a way that we can digest and understand it, because we're not all lawyers, and neither do we have the time to become lawyers and read this stuff. And it is pretty dry. So, I don't encourage you to get out there and read the legislation. So without further ado, we're going to pop into the first topic, the topic of disclosure. And I think, Karty, can I ask you to introduce this one and to talk about the sorts of areas that the problems that you're seeing here?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy Easter, everyone, and thanks for joining us. So yes, so I guess for many advisors and advisor businesses, the disclosure is probably the first area that you really start to feel the impact of this new regime on your business. So almost no surprises that, there's still a few teething issues that we're seeing out there in the market. And I definitely feel that as yet not everyone fully understands sort of the concepts behind the disclosure, that really this disclosure regime, it's no longer a prescriptive disclosure statement that you hand out and give to your clients and tick job done. This is all about client understanding and customizing your disclosure for that person so that it's relevant to their decision making, whether or not to do business with you, whether or not to take your advice, whether or not to follow your recommendations. So understanding those sort of key concepts that MB really was planning when they put together these recommendations or regulations, I think is really key to this. So the first place that you see this disclosure is when you look about people's websites now. And I think industry has done a great job of putting together this new disclosure on the websites. And the key compliance area for me that I worry about is the test, is it sufficiently prominent? So what the regulations expect you to do is have this publicly available information either prominently displayed on your homepage, or there's a prominent link to the information from your homepage. So when I look at different websites at the moment, I'm looking how easy is this information to spot. And if I can't spot it and I'm actively looking out for it, then to me that's sort of possibly a hint that it might not yet be meeting the prominence test. So I think having that sort of outside view, looking at your website and checking for prominence is probably a good idea. Also getting some questions about what do they mean by putting this public available information on your internet site. Does that include Facebook and Instagram? So I did some research on that, and definitely an internet site is really all about your website. I even checked in with our colleagues at FMA to say, how are you expecting to monitor this? And definitely the key concept is your website. However, if you do use other social media sites, maybe like LinkedIn or Facebook, and you've actually got a business page, then I think it's sensible maybe to link that back to your website and say, hey, there's important information there. And that way that you're going to sort of cover that gap anyway and take a bit of conservative route and make sure that you're covered. In terms of advertising, we're getting a lot of questions at the moment about advertising and are we doing this correctly? Remember, we no longer have that extra component that an AFA used to have, that you had to put a disclosure statement was available on request and free of charge. So you don't need to put that anymore, but you still have obligations with advertising. It can't be misleading or confusing or deceptive in any way. So again, you want to do a sense check and make sure that that's really you can justify any statements, I think, that you put in your advertising. The other thing that I look to at the moment is the FMA recently did a consultation on some new guidance for advertising, and I take that as a good guideline as to what's coming and what the expectations are for what advertising should look like going forward. So I would actually take that as a lead and say, if they're, asking questions on it, that's probably a strong hint that those are the future expectations. So what does good disclosure look like? Well, I think, like anything, clear, concise, effective communication. Is it easy for the person to understand? Remember, you can find a lot of information and some really good documents that have been produced. Number one is obviously the Financial Services Guide on Disclosure, which has been really great. But while that's got some hints in terms of here's some examples of how to word it, remember that you've still got to customize it to your own advisors and to your own business. All right. What I worry about is that people are going to set and forget, set up their disclosure templates and documents, use some of the new wording, and then forget to customize it later on. So what you've got to keep in mind is if there's a new conflict of interest arise, or maybe you have a new accreditation with the company, or maybe you lose an agency, or new arrangements that you entered into, all those things can impact some of the disclosure statements that you make. So make sure that you keep this a living document and living fresh in your mind that you're going to update on a regular basis. The areas I've been particularly looking at is some of the technology that automates disclosure, because remember, technology is only as good as what you're putting into it. So your technology documents won't know if something has changed with that advisor or that business. So it comes down to the licensee and the advisor to make sure that you continually check those disclosures and keep them up to date. In terms of simple compliance checks at the moment, again, I'd be checking to make sure that you've got the right information in the right places at the right time. It is slightly different between what you're disclosing at the time you agree your nature and scope of the advice, as opposed to when you give the recommendations. I'm also looking at people's business cards and sign-off signatures. Remember, you're now a financial advisor. So we're still seeing some interesting, shall we say, and unusual titles out there at the moment. But remember, financial advisor is the key title that we're expecting to see from now on. And don't forget to update your email signature as well. Really easy one to miss, but that's probably one of the most prominent places where people will see your name and title as an advisor. So I guess that's my sort of key thoughts there. I might hand over now to maybe David and Steve if there's anything that you'd like to chip in with that.
I can add a couple of things on that. The prominence one is interesting. We had a business we were doing a review on, and they said, is it prominent enough? And I thought, oh, it technically is, but it took me 10 minutes to find it, like you're saying, Karty. So it can depend on how busy your page is and where exactly things are on the page. So watch out for that. And one of the things in terms of process-wise, I guess if you've gone through a good process, be confident in that process. Don't necessarily worry what the rest of the market's doing. One of the things we find is somebody says, oh, well, this is what they did and this is what they did. Just have confidence that you've gone through your process, you've either engaged with somebody or you've used the guide, and what you've got is certainly put you in a very good starting spot, and proceed from there with confidence. Don't be too worried about what the rest of the market is doing. You don't know if they've gotten help from somebody, if they've done it on their own. Just have confidence in what you're doing. Do you have anything else to add, David?
Yeah, on those particular points, the first one on prominence is consider that possibly up to 70% of New Zealanders do their internet search using mobile devices. So prominence has got to apply to both your website and also your mobile device. So when you look at your website on your mobile device, it changes its format. So where something is a prominent button on your website, it's lost somewhere when you go to your mobile device. So as you're looking and working through that, then test it on both devices, because it's got to be prominent on whatever device people go to. And then just on Steve's second point around sort of trust your processes, what we envisage will happen is this is a principles-based regime. So where everyone's interpreting it the way that they think it should be interpreted. And I agree with Karty that the industry is making a great effort. But as time goes on, the FMA will put out some form of guidance to help clarify things for people. So it's a journey we're on. So don't expect that it's going to be absolutely perfect on day one, because everyone's learning as we go. But if you've made a really good attempt and you've disclosed everything that you believe is necessary, well then, no one's going to shoot you down, really, from that sort of perspective. Back to you there, Steve.
Just adding on that really quick, I had a meeting with the FMA yesterday and they said, it doesn't have to be perfect. Everything doesn't have to be perfect on day one. It's a continuous improvement. So keep that in mind as you're going through the process.
I would also add to this, just in terms of the whole prescribed disclosure thing that we used to come from, what that means is that the regulations used to tell us exactly what to say in a disclosure statement and exactly how to say it. And I get nervous every time I have an advisor say to me, can you have a look at my disclosure statement? Because there is no disclosure statement anymore. And whenever somebody says to me, can you look at my disclosure statement, I think they've missed that point.
Yeah.
What that lack of prescription means is there's flexibility around how you present this information. So you don't necessarily have to have a button on your website that says, read my disclosure. You can spread that stuff throughout your website in places that are relevant. So take, for example, the nature and scope of the advice that you give in your business. To me, that should be the core of your main page, right? If someone's coming to your website, you want to tell them what you do. So that is your main page. Your contact information is likely to be on a contact us page, because that's where people tend to look for it. So you can split the information up and put it in logical places on your website. And that will probably meet, as long as it's clear and it makes sense, it'll help you to meet that prominence test. And what I'd recommend is just talk to a couple of your friendly clients and say, hey, look, there's information that I have to make available. Can you take a look and see whether you can find it?
Yeah.
A member of the public that can find it, rather than one of us that knows what we're looking for, then you're pretty confident that you can be on the right track.
One of the areas, Mark, that we're seeing sort of some confusion is around the stage 2 and stage 3. And it depends obviously on the type of advice you're giving and the length of time. But if you're sitting with a client and for a first meeting and you're working through and working out the nature and the scope, and at the same time you're also in that meeting giving them an indicative set of financial advice that's subsequently summarized in a statement of advice in written form, well, then you've actually given the advice in the same meeting. So it's more practical to give your stage 2 advice verbally, and then just follow it up in a combined stage 2 and stage 3 as part of your final set of advice. So you have the flexibility, because this regime doesn't require the advice or the disclosure to be in writing, unless, of course, the client asks for it. So be innovative around that, and keep in the back of your mind that the whole regime is encouraging flexibility and innovation. That's actually built into some of the foundation principles of FMCA. So, that's what Mark's saying. Make it feel good, as opposed to it being a prescriptive document and a separate standalone document. So what we're actually doing is we're actively discouraging our clients from calling it a disclosure statement, because it just, when you use the term disclosure statement, you go back to thinking about how you used to operate before the 15th of March. So we try and use more innovative, friendly terms.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's about the story that you're telling to the client, and making this part of that logical story. And the other thing to keep in mind that for my part is the disclosure information that's required is only part of that story. There are other laws that have elements that you really need to get as part of, for example, your engagement letter, such as the Privacy Act requirements of having your client's consent to share the information with the FMA if they come knocking on your door, or with your compliance advisor who's giving you support. So that sort of information will need to be part of your story as well, part of the agreement that you make with advisors, and there'll be other information that you have to give with that you'll give as part of your business processes in terms of giving the client advice. So as I say, it's all about making it part of a logical story, and part of that it fits in with the whole thing that you're doing at the time, whether it be your engagement agreement, your client agreement of some sort, or your statement of advice when you're giving advice to the client. There are other things that you tell at the same time. Should we move on to the second topic? David, I think this is your one. We've got the topic of the advice process, about how we're raising the bar with this regime. So can I hand over to you, please?
Yeah, so this is another area of innovation. So remembering, two of the key principles under FMCA is not to have unnecessary compliance costs. And by that, we're talking about burdening the client with additional compliance paper and sign-offs. That's not the intent behind this regime. And secondly, innovation and flexibility. So whichever way you slice and dice it, we still need to do the 6-step advice process, even if it's just an annual review, because the definition of financial advice is giving an opinion or a recommendation about buying or selling, or not buying or selling a financial product, and simply saying to a client, hey, everything's okay and no changes are required. That's still financial advice. So that still requires you to have assessed the client's situation, analyze the products and the suitability, and then given them the recommendation, which may be verbal, by the way, and then followed up on an ongoing basis. So what we're encouraging people to do is to think creatively. Start talking to your clients proactively and saying, how would you like us to provide that advice? Both the initial advice and also ongoing advice. And increasingly you'll see a trend towards digitization. And so think about that practically, because you can actually take a lot of the stuff that you've got, extract it out of things like statements of advice, and have them as information sheets that you can have as standalone documents. So that way, then your statement of advice is really simple. Because one of the keys we've got to look at under Section 431 of the Financial Markets Conduct Act, which is one of the key duties, and also under the code, is that we've got to take reasonable steps to ensure our clients understand the nature and scope, and also the advice itself. So trying to put everything into one big advice document is sort of going counter to what we actually need to do from a duties perspective. So segmenting stuff out and making it available, pardon me, as and when the clients need it is a much easier way to go. So we're encouraging people to be progressive. You don't have to have all the stuff in writing. You can do video recordings. You can send your advice out in a series of emails. You can use text. You can use whatever medium is going to work for you and your clients, provided though you've got some form of audit trail around that. Now, when we're looking at this whole process, you go, well, what standard do we have to meet? And the standard is that which is articulated in the New Zealand Certificate in Financial Services Level 5 version 2. So that's the actual output standard that we have to meet. And then over time, the code committee may alter that and we may need to go to a new qualification. But as of today, that's the standard we've got to meet. So if you haven't done the level 5 qualification, the version 2, well, then you need to sort of read up about what is expected, because that's what you're going to be assessed against. If there's a dispute, you're going to be assessed against what would another professional in a similar situation have done. And what they'll do is they'll go to the reference source, which is the level 5 qualification. So that's why your record keeping is so important. So although you can give advice verbally, you still need to be able to prove that you gave the client sufficient information. You went through steps to ensure they actually understood the information. You can retrieve information in a timely manner as and when required by the FMA or an auditor or a compliance review sort of process. So all of that is really important. So that's why you're still going to see a majority of people delivering their financial advice in a written format. But it doesn't have to be purely written. We've now got clients that are integrating this with websites and little pop-up boxes, taking clients through some form of self-analysis. We've got clients that are building little videos. So some of the standard information material that was included in a statement of advice is now taken out and is in a little sort of podcast that the advisor has a link through to their website or link through to their YouTube page, and the clients can view that. So links are now perfectly acceptable within documents, whereas sort of, say, 5 or 10 years ago, they were sort of frowned upon, but things have moved on from a technology perspective. So as advisors, we've got to move with that. But it's all about your clients, and good conduct is about having a client focus. So find out how your clients like to receive information. How would they prefer to engage with you? And then deliver your advice and tailor your advice process to suit the way that your clients operate. But keeping in the back of our mind, everything we do, both verbal and in writing, needs to be clear, concise, and effective. And effective means A, they will read it, and B, they've got a good chance of understanding it. And that's the key, is making sure the stuff is presented in a way and it's of a size and of a relevance that clients aren't threatened by it and go, oh, this is pretty cool. And they pick it up and they read your advice and they take action.
Just a question that I can have for you, in fact, but before I do ask it, for those of you that are watching the webinar, if you've got any questions at any time, please just pop them into the Q&A window, and then we'll ask the panelists your questions. But a question I often get asked, and I think it's really useful to have this opportunity to ask our legends this question. I'm doing a client review. What do I have to do? Can I open that question up for the panel? How much do I have to do when I do a client?
Yep. So it will vary, Mark, based on the client's situation, the type of products, the riskiness of the products, and sort of what's happening in the economic environment, I suppose. But as a minimum, you need to do, firstly, whatever you and the client agreed you were going to do from a service agreement perspective. So if when you engage the client, you said, hey, we're going to have an annual review, well, then there's an expectation that annually you're going to have that review. If it said we're going to do it biannually, well, then it applies to that. So there's a contractual obligation. But the minimum we need to do is prove suitability of the product and the advice. In other words, in some shape or form, we've got to find out from the client, what is your current situation? Has it actually changed from when we gave you the initial advice? So you identify that by simple questioning and answering. So that establishes the client. Then we also go, what has changed in the marketplace as far as interest rates, tax issues, new products or solutions that have come on the market. So that may trigger us to say, well, the product that we recommended before was eminently suitable, but now there's new solutions in the market, or there's new issues or risks that we've got to consider. Once we've looked at those sort of factors, then we go, is the product actually meeting the client's goals? And so we have to just double check all of those sorts of things. And then obviously as part of all of that, check that the client actually understands the product they've got, understands what their goals are, understands the risks associated with the product, and either not having everything they need or whatever that the situation happens to be. So something that is a simple little annual review actually can still be simple on the surface, but there's a number of checks that the advisor needs to be going through. And an experienced advisor will do that automatically and subconsciously. A less experienced advisor will have a checklist that they'll follow. But once again, it's all around suitability between the product, the service, and the client.
Thank you, David. Karty,
Yes, David, can I add to that? I totally agree. I think it's very much about the world changes around us and our lives change. And so without having a proper review, how do we know that, you know, what we have in place is still suitable for us and our changing needs? And a lot of time clients really don't understand what they've already got in place and go looking for other solutions, and yet they've already got it. But I guess one of the things that I'm pretty hot on is that when you do a review, again, be client-centric. Think about it from the client's perspective. I had an email yesterday from my advisor, and the list of generic questions really had nothing to do with us. Like, you know, have you stopped smoking? Have you had any more children? Well, I've never smoked, and I'm probably a bit old for more children at this stage. And so I actually found some of the questions quite offensive. So when we're operating in a client-centric environment, we should actually tailor the questions to that client and think about what's relevant for them, because you're wanting them to engage with you. You don't want them to be turned off by your questions or your process.
Yeah, I agree with you very much, Karty. To me, it's very much around what's right for the client. And what's right for the client in almost all instances when they're up for a review is look at and find out whether it's still suitable and give them advice. That's your job. You know, just rolling it over for another year is generally not the right thing to do. Steve, what would you like to add?
Yep. A couple of comments on that. David's point around what you're contractually obligating yourself to do. We find quite a few advisors are very aspirational in what they communicate to clients. And then when we actually look at it, they're not meeting those obligations in terms of their review cycle. It happens quite frequently where people will say, we'll review you every 6 months or every year. And as it turns out, it is actually rarely, if ever, done. Or potentially maybe just a very passive offer of a review in some way, shape, or form. A couple of notes on that. One of the things in terms of our file reviews that we really pick out is file notes. File notes is such an important part of the process, and you need to have them incorporated into your record keeping process. So what are you going to do with file notes, and how do you actually record what conversations you've had? I think Karty touched on, or Mark, you touched on the word of story. One of the things with the advice process, you like to be able to take it from the beginning to the end and understand the entire process. That's very, very important. And file notes is such an important part of that. And now today you're looking at file notes. It can sometimes be texts, can sometimes be emails, messengers. Consider how that integrates into your record keeping policy. One of the bigger areas we see is people using different messenger services, which is really convenient for the client and the advisor, but just make sure you're getting those and recording those. And you're able to pick them up and put them in. And just a side note, when you are being innovative in terms of how you deliver your advice and your information, you need to do a fair bit of training around that and have strong controls around that. As somebody whose job used to be to listen to advisors speaking to clients, we literally had a scenario where we just paid $25,000 as opposed to ever allowing the call to go into any type of public forum. So be very careful in terms of your training as directors of the FAP, in terms of what advisors are able to do. Make sure you stay on top of that training, and you need to test that to make sure they stay to that, because oftentimes conversations can break down a little bit. You can talk about family situations or other situations that just aren't appropriate.
So just a point around the monitoring and the suitability. As an industry, we've done really well around identifying suitable products for the client when we first engage with them. But as an industry, we haven't sort of focused on that ongoing monitoring. And your relationship with the client, you're probably going to spend 50 times more time with the client over your sort of career in the monitoring stage than you are in the initial sales stage. So what we have to be doing as an industry and within our respective businesses is going, how do we actually sort of jazz up our monitoring so that it becomes a lot more effective? And if you're doing your monitoring really well, it becomes an amazingly effective tool for cross-selling and upselling and building deeper, more meaningful and more valuable relationships with your client. Because if you're getting paid by a client directly, or you're getting some form of trail commission, then whichever way people slice and dice it and whatever they want to call it, at the end of the day, it's a servicing commission. You're being remunerated to ensure that whatever the client has is suitable for their known needs today and their anticipated needs for the foreseeable future. So we need to be taking this ongoing monitoring and annual reviews really seriously, probably a bit more seriously than before.
Yep. And just to add to what David's saying, I think there's a common sense element to it.
Yeah.
If you're not tracking when the last review was, once they get out past, like, we don't like to see it get out past 3 years, but certainly out past 5 years, you can generally assume somebody's in a different life stage, and you should be, I don't want to say urgently trying to review them, but you should be taking best efforts to ensure that you've attempted to review them. If the client opts out of that process, that's up to them, but you need to record that you've made a strong effort as time goes on to contact them and communicate proactively that it's time for a review.
I'm going to have to move us on because I notice it's 10:05. So thank you very much for your feedback on that. And just always remember, guys, the maxim of under promise and over deliver, not the other way around. And if I can hand you on to the questioner, that was, sorry, a comment, Steve, on your point about people that promise in their contracts a 6-monthly review and then didn't do it. So yes, under promise and over deliver, guys. The next point that we've got on here is the we've got about full licensing. So Steve, can I get you to give us a brief intro on this one?
Yes, I can definitely be brief on this one. So in terms of full licensing, I think a lot of you are probably in that decision-making process now, which is probably a bit of a relief because you're not putting together documents. You've made some efforts to get to this spot, which is exactly where you should be. And then moving forward, there's a lot of theories as to whether or not you should go early or late, or just wait 6 months kind of thing. We're just of the belief, just don't go longer than 18 months. And if you're ready to go, there's nothing wrong with going early. It's somebody's got to do it. There's a number of applications that are in already, and it's a relatively good process to go through and be done if you're confident in where you're at right now and you're confident in your structure. In terms of moving forward as an approach, we really encourage you to look at it from a director level. And this is where you kind of move a little bit outside of I'm a financial advisor to I'm a director of a business and I'm making decisions from that perspective. And the big change in this regime is you're moving into that role more actively. So from the director level, you want to know all the preparation you've done. Are you able to implement that in your business? And have you implemented that in your business? We in the compliance world have seen a lot of dusty documents in the past. People put a lot of effort, pay some money, get policies and procedures, meet standard conditions, and they sit in the corner. Obviously, you don't have that with PDFs anymore. But we worked with a business and they found one from 7 years ago that the person who got fired 4 years ago had never, ever seen. Or sorry, the person that got hired 4 years ago had never seen. So you have to be aware that these are active documents. You need to be incorporating them into your business. And if you're at the stage where you're doing that, go ahead. Make sure you read the full licensing guide. Make sure you've met all those criteria and you as a director of the business are comfortable that you do meet those criteria. As you go through the process, it's quite simple. You go on to the FSPR and very close to where you add advisors, you'll apply for your FAP, full FAP license, and you'll go forward. You answer a questionnaire. For most businesses, it takes around 20 minutes, relatively simple. But like I said, you want to make sure that you are prepared as a director to move forward and that you've implemented those policies so you're going to meet the standard conditions and that you're confident that your business can hold up in that environment. Another quick point on that, if you have any questions or concerns about your structure or you're not confident about your structure, it's probably best to wait and speak to somebody about that. There are some people that have gone into the new regime with some structure variability that they're waiting to solve. So if you're one of those, get your structure sorted and then move in. I'll pass it over to maybe Karty for some thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. One of the things that I'd strongly recommend is that reviewing that full license guide, because there's just a wealth of information in there. And it's really important that you don't go through the process and sign off that declaration to say, yes, we're fully ready. Because as soon as you do, the FMA can come and say to you, okay, I'd like to have a look at some of those documents, please. So you want to make sure that you've really fully understood the requirements and that you've got policies and procedures and frameworks in place. And there's a lot of detail in that guide. It takes a lot to unpick. So for some of the policies, it says, have you got a documented policy? Has it been approved? Has it been reviewed recently? Has it been tested? So you want to go through all those processes and feel really confident before you go into that full licensing process. It's not a race, but then we are on a limited time frame as well. One of the things is that FMA always talks about anything that you build needs to be fit for purpose for your business. So that means that it needs to be appropriate, really. If you're a small business, you don't need massive documents and frameworks on how you run your business. But then if you're a FAP with a large number of authorised bodies or large number of advisors underneath you, then it needs to really demonstrate oversight of what's happening in that business. There's a few issues that we can see in the market that are not yet fully ironed out. For example, some of the technology providers haven't really built the technology for sole trader FAPs. So these are individuals that don't have a company, and that's causing a little bit of problem for some. We're still seeing a lot of movement of financial advisors and authorised bodies between different groups. And we've seen some of the contracts that once have been provided, that the FAPs have found that they're actually too difficult to meet the terms and conditions of those contracts. So my recommendation is take your time and iron out all these things. Don't be a race. You know, there's no first prize for the first one that gets their license. If anything, they're more likely to be a guinea pig for what does licensing look like. So get it right, take your time, but then allow plenty of time for the assessment process as well. From my experience, preparing a license application normally takes most businesses a full 6 months. So I'd be aiming to get your license application in sort of maybe in about, just before Christmas time, and then have a nice break over Christmas knowing that somebody else is now going to assess it.
Oh, Karty, you're so mean to them.
Been a busy year for advisors, right?
It is, I agree. Yeah, I agree. So the key thing from my perspective, I agree with everything Steve and Karty are saying, is you need to understand the legislation, the regulation, the code, good conduct, and also any product provider obligations that you have as well. So if you have a good understanding of all of that, then it's going to make it much easier for you to be able to interpret, first off, the full license guide that the FMA has, and then secondly, the questions that you'll see on the FMA's portal. So those questions on the portal seem quite simplistic, and they are, but what it's effectively doing is, as you're answering them, you're making effectively like a statutory declaration. You're making a promise to the FMA that yes, you have this, and yes, this stuff it actually operates. Because there's a difference between having the document and actually having a document that actually is functioning and is workable. So think carefully as you answer it, because it's too easy. We went through with one client yesterday, from woe to go, we finished the whole thing in under an hour. But that company has spent well over 6 months with a whole heap of staff building all of the stuff behind it, which is sort of what Karty is saying. So it was relatively straightforward for them to go through and complete the online document. So understanding your obligations and having the competence, knowledge, and skill to operate is really important. The other thing to keep in the back of your mind is we're somewhere between 50 and 70% of transitional license applicants now being sole practitioners. It's really important you think about your own individual competence, because you're saying, I want a license based on me, the individual. And as a result, it's all around your own competence, knowledge, and skill. So trying to say, yes, I'm going to meet all of these wonderful standards, but you haven't got your level 5, in fact, you've got nothing, that makes it quite hard for the FMA to go, yeah, we have confidence that he or she understands this new regime. So be prepared to prove to the FMA that you do have that personal competence, knowledge, and skill. It's more important at the smaller end than what it is at the larger end, because the larger the business, the more you will rely on systems, processes, and controls. At the smaller end, it's all about you. Back to you.
I'd add to that. That was great. Thanks, everyone. I would take your time with this and make sure that you've got everything sorted before you apply. As much as you've been told here, that going through and answering the questions is pretty straightforward, but it's having the evidence to back it up. And beyond having written evidence, it's also having those following up what you write in your business, actually doing what you say in those documents. So proving that you're meeting these requirements is essential. So you don't want to be in a situation where you go through and tick all the boxes and get your full license and then have the FMA come on and knock on your door and discover that you're not meeting any of the requirements and throw you up against a wall. So get it sorted first. Now, I think it was Jeremy Moore, who's one of our fantastic legal advisors in the Get in Shape Road show, said, just as a hint, some of these questions, and I think we were talking about the business continuity plan, there's a question, do you have one? Just a broad hint, if you answer no in your full license application, it's probably not going to see you right through a full license. So, a little bit of a clue, they're probably quite leading questions. And if you haven't got any of these things in place, then you really want to think about why not and should you be developing them. This is very much eating an elephant. As Karty and David have both said, it's 6 months to prepare for this process. So you do want to make sure that you're taking your time now in small chunks to prepare your business. So I would recommend block out every week for the next year and ongoing, actually, about 2 hours. And that's your time to prepare your business. Take that full licensing guide from the FMA, and go page by page. And, in 1 week in your 2-hour block, you might only be looking at the cybersecurity section and sorting out your stuff around cybersecurity, and get advice, get help. That's what we do in our industry, is we're out there giving clients advice about complex products. This process is going to be quite a complex process. So get advice to help you. Break it up into small pieces, prepare yourself, and get ready to apply for that license, as Karty suggests, by the end of the year, or sometime soon thereafter. Okay, we've got one more topic to tackle, and this one is around sort of more broad topics around the industry. So we might take these ones a little bit more one at a time. Does anyone want to pop off with I've had this question a couple of times recently, actually. Am I an AML reporting entity? Who wants to tackle that one?
Oh, yeah, look, I'll jump in there. I think it's something that you do need to be careful of now, that there is a bit of some crossover legislation between what's in the AML legislation, and it relates back to the Financial Advisors Act, which of course we know has now been repealed. So until we've actually got an amendment to the AML legislation, there are a few areas that you've just got to be a bit careful of, because you may now be caught, as a licensee. So remember that the AML legislation, it's activities based. It's based really on what are the activities that you do, and would that mean that you might be captured? Generally, if you provide investment advice, if you're holding client money, if you're an issuer, there's a whole lot of sort of general areas where, you're most likely to be captured. But there are a few areas, such as if you have a shared obligation. So say the issuer or the lender is actually the reporting entity, and they're putting some of the responsibility on you, and maybe the KiwiSaver provider. So they may still be the reporting entity, but putting some obligations on you. I'd be really taking some time at the moment to clarify that, and check to be on the safe side, and maybe have a written agreement in place if you do have arrangements with other providers, just to be clear on who does what. Remember, FMA can't give you legal advice on are you a reporting entity or not. So if you're not sure, then you really need to seek and get your own help for your own situation. Anyone else wants to cover there on AML?
Yeah, so where we're seeing the questions coming through is around if you were an AFA before, which then triggered your requirement to be a reporting entity if you're giving investment advice. What's now happened is if that AFA has a company and is an authorised body, then that AML responsibility as a reporting entity now goes through to the authorised body, which is the financial advice provider. Now, realistically, if you've got a whole heap of authorised bodies, it's pointless them all having separate AML risk assessments and programs and having individual audits. So what you can then do is consolidate that up to whoever the license holder is, and then we'll advise them on how to put in place what's called a designated business group. And that way then you can take all of these people, all of these authorised bodies that have an AML obligation, and you consolidate it all into one designated business group, and we can reduce a whole heap of costs. So we're doing a lot of work on that right at the moment, as the investment advisors in particular start to sort of address that.
Cool.
Thank you, guys. The next point on this list is around how there's a lot of voices in the market saying to financial advisors, you want to do this. And one of the things we've tried to do with the Advisor Transition Working Group at the FSC is to try and streamline those voices as much as possible. So you will notice that when you get an email from your providers with an update, it might have FSC in the title. And if it does, then it's a message it'll come from multiple angles, but it'll be the same message. So they've been out sort of once a month over the last 2 or 3 years, really. And you can look at a message from our company, from Partners Live, from some of the other providers, and it'll be identical word for word for those messages. So do check. Sometimes they're the same. But any other thoughts, people, or maybe Steve, because you haven't spoken for a little while, about how advisors should deal with having multiple voices telling them what to do?
Yes, I'm a big believer in that there are too many voices and too many pressures on advisors right now. Everybody's kind of, I feel like advisors are hearing kind of a relatively similar message from so many different places, whether it be people like us, whether it be industry groups, whether it be product providers, that they're all kind of speaking in the advisor's ears. And we all know that communication is a two-way street, and sometimes people misunderstand things or misspeak things. But there have been a few advisors spooked by what they've heard and kind of started running around, calling quickly and asking questions. So I think this goes back to the earlier statement that be confident in your process, and just kind of don't listen to the noise. But as long as you've had a good process, be confident in that process. If you are not confident in your process, and put more effort into your process for how you've approached these changes, because at the very least, you need to be confident in your steps moving forward.
Any other quick points from anybody?
No, that's pretty good.
I would say, find a trusted voice and follow it and get advice. So, rather than trying to listen to everything, we've been in this process for a couple of years now. I'd raise my hand and say, listen to the FSC, because we're out there trying to streamline it for people. But there are a number of voices out there. Find one that you trust, a reputable voice, and follow that voice and get some independent advice, from people like the experts that you see today. And then between those two sources, I think you'll be in very good stead. But if you try and read everything that's out there, you'll want to poke a pencil in your eye.
So just on that, Mark, it's really important that if you're going to sort of go and get some independent advice, be it from ourselves or someone else, do your due diligence on those people you're about to hire, because it's really sad. So far this week, we have done 3 letters of engagements, all of which have been accepted, for us to redraft documentation that people have paid good money to have produced. And every single one of them is just appalling stuff. And you go, this is it's just a rort what actually happens out there. So before you hand over money, check who it is that you're planning to engage, because some people are really good and some aren't quite so good. So it's an important decision you're making, because getting independent advice is going to either help you get compliant, or it's going to raise a whole lot of red flags out there.
Cool, thanks, David. That's a really good point. We've got another point on the slide here that we just need to wrap up with around industry structure. We've got comments here around personal risk and mortgages and KiwiSaver advice. Who wants to tackle this one first?
I'll jump in, I guess. In terms of industry structure, I think with a lot of industries, as they change, that change isn't at one point in time, and then you see consistency moving forward. So I think, you're seeing right now, you've had a lot of change. You've got some really big players in the industry who are, I don't want to say have been late in communicating exactly what their structures are going to be, but there's certainly not put people at ease as they've progressed through the process. And there's a lot of decision making going on. We've talked about it before. Do I fit in this FAP? Do I want to fit in this FAP? Can I meet the requirements to fit in this FAP? And coming up to the key dates of the 15th, I think there wasn't a lot of time for some of those people to make those decisions as they went through. So there is a lot of people, a lot of either authorized bodies or FAPs trying to make decisions right now. And you do have to make those decisions for your business. And you have to make your decisions based on what you're able to deliver and what you're going to be capable of delivering. David mentioned your skill set. Very important to think about your skill set and how you're going to move forward and whether or not you can actually deliver that. You don't want it to necessarily be aspirational. And then you get into it and then you get in trouble on the other side. We're big believers in hit the minimum bar first. If you can prove you do the minimum bar for a couple of years, then get aspirational.
I think one of the things here is that some of it's not actually change. It's really just how the industry's adapted to the change. And I can take, for example, the personal risk and mortgages point here, where we've moved from a system where banks have contracts with dealer groups, so they have with aggregators, so with big groups of people. And if you want to have access to mortgage advice, to give mortgage advice to clients, you have to operate through an aggregator. And with insurers, the insurers tend to have their agreements directly with the financial advisors, and more now with the financial advice providers. That structure hasn't really changed. It's just adapted to the new regime. So, if you want to give mortgage advice, you still need to somehow work through an aggregator, whether that be as an authorized body for that aggregator who now has a license, or through a contractual arrangement when you've got your own financial advice provider license. In the insurance space, as I said before, we're now getting insurers that are having agreements with the financial advice providers, and rather than the individual advisors, we may have agreements with the individual advisors. That hasn't really a significant change to the industry, but it is very much a turning point for the financial advisor themselves about how then do I continue to give mortgage advice? What does my license structure look like within this industry structure? Any other?
Oh, sorry, I was just going to jump in, Mark. On top of that, remember, there's going to be a lot of change moving forward. So if you're not sure what your path is now, we're pretty confident the world isn't going to look the same in 2, 3, 5 years out. And having been through this in other jurisdictions, the world is going to look very different as we move forward, and especially with the integration of technology. So be prepared to be flexible. So the decision you're making right now isn't necessarily going to be where you are in 2, 3, and 5 years.
Yeah, just a couple of quick points on KiwiSaver there. The first one is we see a lot of advisor clients that have got, say, literally 1,000 or 5,000. We saw one advisor yesterday, he's got 8,000 KiwiSaver clients, and it's just him. Now that may have been okay prior to the 15th of March, but now there's an ongoing obligation to prove suitability of the advice. So how are you going to do that when you've got 8,000 clients and there's just yourself? You're going to need some pretty good automated structures, hence flexibility and innovation that needs to come in. So think about those obligations, because you may have sold them as part of a group scheme or whatever, but now you've got to service these KiwiSaver clients moving forward. So that's the first point. And the second one is you've got this 2-year transition period. So if you are giving KiwiSaver advice prior to the 15th, then you can continue to give advice on KiwiSaver in the new regime for the next 2 years, whilst you work your way through and you get your investment strand of your level 5. But the concept of class advice no longer exists under the law. So the way you actually deliver the advice may need to change. So you can still provide financial advice, but it needs to change a bit, because it's now all financial advice as opposed to this thing that was class advice and no longer exists. So some adaptation needs to occur. So just because we've moved into the transition period doesn't mean to say everything is 100% the same as what it was prior to the 15th.
Karty.
Cool. Look, I'm just thinking in the interest of time, should we sort of move on to the next slide, do you think, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. We just have a good question here from somebody around doing that due diligence that David mentioned before for your compliance advisor. And one short answer to the question, to the end of this question, is what standards do compliance advisors have to meet before they can hang up their shingle as a compliance advisor? And the answer to that is there isn't any. So your due diligence is so very important, because anybody can be out there hanging up their shingle to say they're a compliance advisor. So what sort of things should they be doing for this due diligence? Can someone just quickly tackle that question?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk briefly about that, because we've been advocating both directly with the FMA and MIMBI and Department of Justice for some form of standards to be applied to compliance providers. So the first thing you've got to look at is what's the compliance provider's business structure? Is it a one-person operation, or is it a bigger operation so that they've got the capability to service you? Because the last thing you want is to engage a fantastic compliance provider, but then he or she gets too busy and they can't scale up. So capability is one of them. The second one is around their competence. Are they just someone that was an advisor in the past regime and suddenly thinks they can take their experience from the old regime and apply it to the new regime? Or have they got some form of qualification? around understanding what compliance is and how you actually do it, and the levels of and types of compliance, defence and insurance. Have they got professional indemnity insurance? And if so, what type and how robust is it? What sort of client base do they have? Are they experienced in working with my type of business, or have they worked in a totally different type of business? Are they narrow focused as far as they provide really good compliance advice in one single aspect, or are they broader so that they can cover every aspect of your business? Are they a business that can grow as my business evolves and grows? So do they have multiple capability, or can they reach out to trusted partners so that they can bring to the table to support your business a range of other experts if they don't have that sort of in-house? And that's why in our particular case, we have fundamentally changed the compliance consultants that we have. And we've gone more to people with legal training, because it's a whole new regime and it's all around innovation and flexibility and simplifying the process as opposed to making it more complex. So we've gone for younger, smarter, more articulate, legally trained, technology savvy compliance people, so that we can provide the best service we possibly can in what is fundamentally quite a different regime than what it was sort of prior to the 15th.
Karty, can you add to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think it's the same as the due diligence that you would do on your own investment advisor or any outsourced service provider. You're looking at what's their qualification, what's their experience, what's the practical skill level. And as David says, where's the areas of speciality? You can't be all things to all different businesses. So sometimes you do need to have areas that you specialise in, or other compliance partners that you make a referral to, just like you would with your own advice business. So yeah, I think it's important that you've got a robust business with insurance, with knowledge, with backup, and somebody that you're comfortable working with too. So I think that's it's got to be a good partnership, because there's got to be a lot of trust between the two different, the business and the compliance partner, and you want to be building a long-term, business relationship.
Yes, absolutely. And there are a number of players out there. You can see three that are represented here today, and we've been working with for the last over a year on this, and there's a good reason that we're working with these three companies. So, but yes, absolutely do your due diligence before you make that call and decide who you're happy to work with. So just a little bit of a summary here of what we've covered out today. Remember, there are a number of resources that are out there. So you do have to adapt your business to this new world. And particularly before you apply for your full license, which you have to do, you have to obtain your full license before the 15th of March 2023. And that time will tick. So plan what you need to do, devote a couple of hours each week to it, get some help, look at the resources that are out there, and very, very carefully read them. It's just not a matter of just reading through them once and going, oh yeah, that's easy. You've got to dig into those details. Many of the answers that are required are covered in the level 5 certificate. So, the sooner you get that level 5 under your belt, particularly for smaller businesses with 1 or 2 advisors, that you'll be in a better position. And remember that running a licensed business is more than just giving advice. We've come from a regime that was all about giving advice. Now, giving advice is the underlying service, but you've got to run a business over the top of that. And the licensing is about how that business is run. So, and as we said, is, find a trusted source and stick with that trusted source and just follow that source through. You can challenge that source every now and again, but don't get clouded by too many voices. So, keep your eyes open, but try and stick to one path that you can follow and get advice when you need it. Are there any other final points that anybody else would like to make?
I think just mainly that, it's a new regime, it's changing, it's not yet tested in court anywhere, so guidance will come. But in the meantime, if you're unsure, go on the conservative side until there's some really good guidance out there that shapes the regulators' thinking on areas that can be a bit more contentious.
Any other final points from you? David, do you have a final word from you?
No, I think just embrace the whole regime. It's designed to reduce unnecessary compliance costs, and it's designed to encourage flexibility and innovation. So they're the fundamental principles, or some of the fundamental principles behind FMCA, and we need to be taking those on board. And above all, be client-centric in every single decision you make.
Thank you, David. Stephen, final word?
I just wanted to note, and I know Karty echoes this, but be proud of yourselves. This is a pretty big change, and a lot of you have done and engaged and done a relatively good job getting through this. And it's certainly not been easy for an entire industry to make a change through COVID. So I think we generally focus on this is what you have to do, you know, yada, yada, yada. But it's been a big change for the industry, and the industry's done generally a pretty good job engaging and getting through this. So well done.
Thank you, guys. And a final word from me. This is an exciting opportunity. As Steve said before, over the next 3 to 5 years, the industry is going to change shape. And if you're on the vanguard of this, if you're one of the companies that are getting yourselves prepared and you're on top of what the minimum requirements are, you're going to be in a position to open your eyes and look around and see what those opportunities are and capitalize on some of those opportunities and be a leader of that change of what's going to happen over the next 3 to 5 years. So it is a really exciting place to play. As I've said a couple of times, I highly recommend getting some advice from a reputable compliance advisor, someone that you're happy to work with, do your due diligence, and then have that trusted source. Read those resources thoroughly. We've got the advice site, advice.fsc.org.nz, as kind of a hub where we're storing all the information in one place. Get yourselves registered for this monthly series of webinars, and what we're going to do over the next sort of 12 months or so is take an element each month of the full licensing requirements and dig into that in a little bit more depth. And just one final word that I'd make: if you haven't already got a business mentor or an advisory board or something like that in place, you know, they can be a really good sounding board, and they'll help you to take your eyes outside of the business and look at it more holistically. And so, you know, it could be a nice time, if you haven't already got one, to find someone that you're really comfortable to work with, that you just want to bounce ideas off and help you get that business working. And that person doesn't have to be from the financial services industry. It can be from just an experienced business person from outside that can help you tackle those right questions. And you know, you've got other sources for the financial services detail, but for the general business stuff, that'll be an area that there's some exciting opportunities moving forward. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Thank you very much to Steve, to Karty, and to David for joining us once again for this webinar. And if you've got any questions, please get in touch with one of us, and we'll look forward to seeing you for the next webinar in a month. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Happy Easter.